evolution. Evolution really is defined as a slow genetic change in a population over time. It doesn't necessarily happen very quickly. Sometimes it could take tens of thousands of years for evolution to occur. We need to make sure we have some terms defined pretty carefully. A population is defined as a localized group of individuals of the same species. So it's the same species in a given area that makes up a population. So think of all of the humans in Mayapack. That would make up the population of humans in the given area of Mayapack. A species is a group of organisms that can breed and produce fertile offspring. The key there is fertile offspring. We know that in some cases we could have something like a horse and a donkey mate and make a mule. But a mule is not a fertile offspring. It cannot reproduce. It's what we call sterile. So although a donkey and a horse are still very closely related to each other genetically, they're still considered to be separate species because their offspring cannot reproduce. When we talk about evolution, we talk about something called genetic diversity. And really, we're looking to have genetic diversity in a changing environment, and that's what truly drives evolution. If we have diversity in our DNA or our genetics that we have, we can actually allow evolution to occur at a faster rate, and it allows species to kind of avoid extinction, because if they have different features, different genes or DNA, they have the ability to adapt to the environment more efficiently. Remember, when we carry out meiosis, meiosis allows for more variety because not all of the offspring are genetically identical to each other. One of the other ways that we get genetic diversity is through mutations, which unfortunately in that case, we can't plan for a mutation. It's unpredictable. So we never know when it's going to occur. So theoretically, for genetic diversity, organisms that reproduce by meiosis have more diversity than organisms that reproduce through asexual means, mitosis. So an organism that has a favorable trait is going to be able to survive, reproduce, and pass on genes for that favorable trait to their offspring. Now, it's not guaranteed, but they have at least the ability to do that. So over time, we'll have some form of adaptation occur, possibly. So there are two terms that we talk about when we talk about some adaptations that organisms might have. One of them is called mimicry, and that's when we blend in with another organism. And another one is called camouflage, which is where you blend in with the environment. We'll get into those examples a little bit more as time goes on. Survival of the fittest is a term that many of you have probably heard in the past, but maybe don't have a clear-cut definition for it. So in the case of fittest, we talk about fitness not in terms of your physical fitness, how strong you are and how muscular you are, but it's the ability of an organism to survive and reproduce. That's your fitness in terms of survival or evolutionary aspects. So there are two different types of mutations that we can have that can either increase or decrease your fitness. We could have a helpful mutation. Remember, not all mutations are bad. A helpful mutation might increase your fitness, which would increase in frequency in the gene pool. That would change the genetic information overall in the gene pool of a population. So think about a mutation that would allow me to have better feathers on a set of wings for a bird, and those feathers allow me to be able to fly and soar through the sky better. That mutation would help that bird theoretically to be able to survive. So the more organisms that possess that mutation would be more likely to survive and more likely to pass on those traits to their offspring. Whereas a harmful mutation would decrease the fitness of the individual. It would increase mortality, which mortality would mean how quickly, or how death rate essentially, and therefore overall it would decrease in frequency in the gene pool. Think about the mutation that causes hemophilia, which is the ability of your blood to clot. Someone who has hemophilia, their blood does not clot well. So if they get a cut, they could theoretically bleed to death. That would not necessarily make you an overly fit individual, especially if you were an organism that lived in the wild. You would definitely die more easily than another organism who had the ability to clot their blood. So these genes typically do not increase in frequency in the gene pool because these organisms are dying off. They don't have an ability to easily pass them on to their offspring because sometimes they die before they even get to reproduce. Overall, you have to remember that mutations are random. They could be caused by mutagenic agents, things in the environment that can change our DNA. We know that radiation from the sun or UV light can cause mutations. We know that certain chemicals can cause mutations, so keep that in mind. And then we also know that mistakes can happen during cell division, particularly meiosis can change things. We can get some crossing over. Accidentally, parts of chromosomes can break off and get rearranged. Even just during cell division, we could accidentally replace some letters as we're copying DNA. Over time, though, it can lead to speciation. If organisms have changed enough, we get an accumulation of mutations that can lead to a new species. In this case, they will no longer be able to breed and make fertile offspring in the original population. So if we have a new species occur, over time, those mutations have built up so much that those organisms have changed so much that they're no longer even able to reproduce with the original population anymore. Almost lost that one. And there it goes again. So let's talk about some modern examples of evolution. Maybe my board won't fall down this time. Let's talk about the peppered moth. The peppered moth occurred in England during the Industrial Revolution, and the original population of moths were mostly light-colored, and the dark moths were typically eaten. And this was because in that particular area, the trees were relatively light in color. So the light-colored moths blended in with the trees, and the dark-colored moths were very easily seen, so they were eaten more frequently. As time went on, during the Industrial Revolution, pollution increased, which increased the amount of soot that was on the trees, that black, nasty soot. The light-colored moths no longer blended in with the color of the trees. They were more easily seen compared to the dark moths, so they got eaten. The result in the end, we had a decrease in the light moth population and an increase in the dark moth population as a result of an environmental change. And these organisms that were light-colored, unfortunately, just no longer blended in with the environment. They didn't adapt with the environmental changes. They were light-colored. They can't automatically change the color of their bodies, so they were eaten more frequently. In the end, we had a change in the gene pool. There were no longer as many light moths in the gene pool that were reproducing and passing on their DNA to new offspring. Another example of evolution is antibiotic resistance. This is one we hear about quite frequently these days. When you get sick, sometimes you may take antibiotics for it. Most bacteria are killed, so as you're taking the antibiotics, they are meant to kill off bacteria that are causing some sort of an infection in your body. Unfortunately, though, some of them may carry a gene that makes the bacteria not get killed by the antibiotic. We would call those resistant. It could have been through some sort of a mutation that they had, and that particular antibiotic doesn't kill them. So once you get done taking your antibiotics, the ones that didn't get killed are still there. They're present. They are able to survive and reproduce and pass on that gene to their offspring. Remember, bacteria reproduce asexually, so all of their DNA get passed on to their offspring. It's not like with meiosis where it's a chance. Asexually reproducing, they're going to be identical. So now these bacteria that didn't get killed off are identical to their parents and they have that gene. Over time, we end up with an increase in resistance to that particular antibiotic in that region where that bacteria exists in that bacteria gene pool. So in a particular region, we may see lots of bacteria coming out, and that antibiotic is no longer effective in killing off that particular type of bacteria. So scientists have to go around and they have to try and find a new antibiotic that will kill off these bacteria that we know are resistant. And eventually, over time, the antibiotics may no longer be effective. We may end up with bacteria that are resistant to every antibiotic that we know of. We have some that we know are multiply resistant, so they're resistant to multiple antibiotics. And we've seen this with a disorder called MRSA. And we've had MRSA even happen in our school district and in the local area. It's typically found in hospitals and environments where there are a lot of people that come through a particular area. Senior citizens' homes, retirement homes, nursing homes, and big hospitals typically have MRSA exist. We all have bacteria on our skin, and unfortunately over time, some of the bacteria that are there can become resistant to the antibiotics, and they just kind of grow out of control. And unfortunately, they're resistant to so many of the antibiotics that we give that we have to give some very strong antibiotics in order to get rid of it. This has happened with even some other types of bacteria that we have found that are actually resistant to every type of antibiotic that scientists have been able to develop. There aren't many of them that exist, but there are a few out there. That's it for our monitor examples for today.